Somebody comes along and says, he's on a stage with 16 Republican nominees, he has no military experience, and he has never served in political office. And he doesn't give a blank about the Council on Foreign Relations. He doesn't care about NATO. He looks at this as a businessman, and he says it's a bad deal. He looks at optional wars like a reality TV show. If you go into somewhere, you usually get bad ratings, and it doesn't work out on a cost-benefit analysis. So that was his idea about going into Libya, for example. And so he's not wedded to any of these things, and he starts to look at the world empirically that's changed radically from the post-war order's second phase, which was supposed to deal with it. And he add the Obama aberrance, and he starts to come up with crazy ideas. Crazy to them, maybe not so crazy to us. And he said, I like NATO. All they got to do, they're wealthy countries, the GDP of Europe and the population's greater, just pay what they promised. Don't pay as much as we do, but just we pay 4% GDP into military spending, you pay 2%. If you don't going to do it, we're going to leave. Well, I don't think he was going to leave, but that was what he said. And he said to Mexico, you know what, we might have to close the border, we might have to yank out some of the factories and the trade deals, and we might have to put a tariff on products that are sent back. People said, you can't use the word tariff, that's not part of the post-war order. And basically Trump said, well, I don't really want to put on tariff. That's art of the deal. I threaten, and they'll back down maybe from $350 billion surplus to $2 billion. That's a victory. But nobody had ever thought like that before. He was endangering the post-war order. And he looked at the world throughout, and he started to come up with a foreign policy, and they actually memorialized it in 2017. If you looked at the strategic plan of the United States, a national security assessment written by H.R. McMaster and his team, it's pretty much called principled realism. And it is a complete rejection of 75 years of foreign policy of the United States. And it's predicated on the idea that foreign policy and domestic policy are inseparable, and there were certain shibboleths there that we should recognize for what they are. China, the wealthier it's going to be, is going to be more autocratic. The Palestinians are never going to be democratic until they, on their own, throw out their corrupt elite. And we can't help them do that anymore. And Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan are probably not going to be democratic, but they're better than the alternative in Iran. Radical Shia, messianic, expansionary Islam. And Latin America is likely to be communist as capitalist, but if we have our druthers, we're going to support capitalist states and not communist. And you start to read it, it was termed Jacksonian. Don't tread on me foreign policy. And what that meant was, I think, if you read it carefully, it means we're not going to seek trouble in the world. We're not going to be the world's policeman, but we are going to deter our enemies, and we will strike back if they strike us back, and we may have to preempt once in a while, and that will make a safer world. And it might have the same effect, but we're not going to claim that every single struggle in the world is of interest to somebody in Hillsdale County, because we've seen where that leads, economically, domestically. And we're going to start asking for, we have two doctrines of the new Jacksonianism, as I understand it. I'm not being an advocate, I'm trying to explain to you. One is, if what they are doing doesn't matter, why do they do it? If you think trade surpluses don't matter, then why does Germany want them? Why don't they just be like us and say, they don't matter, we'll run a deficit with you. Who cares who has the trade surplus? We'll just take the tariff on, American cars, and we'll do the same thing as you guys have. You have 2.5% on the Audi, we'll have 2.5% in the Ford. Or if trade deficits don't matter, we'll run up a $300 billion surplus, and China will have a 3. And that was sort of the logic that Trump, of course, used. That was the first thing. And the second was that I'm going to calibrate foreign policy in terms of how it affects people. This was kind of scary sometime, and that would mean if we want to stay in Afghanistan, what is the effect on the people who have to go over there? What's the effect on the U.S. budget? And is it really possible to turn Afghanistan into Carmel, California? And if so, at what cost? That's in the principled realism. And so what made it even stranger was that once we saw this new Trump foreign policy that said, I'm looking at everything empirically. NATO is 65 years old. If it works here, I'm willing to subsidize it if you guys want to participate. NAFTA is there, but it's not written in stone. I'm willing to keep going if it's reciprocal. I'm willing to still trade with China if they if they follow the rules in the way that we follow the rules. And everybody said, but we always took a hit. We always took a hit for the greater good. And he said, it's not the greater good, and we can't afford to take the hit. We've done it for 75 years, and we've hollowed out the interior. So that was a very powerful message. It got him nominated in ways that 16 other brilliant candidates did not see. And it's enraged the establishment in the university, and the think tanks, and the foundations, and the political bipartisan establishment. And yet he wrote it all out. It's not just herky-jerky. It's written right out in assessment that we have a new principled realism for a radically different world that doesn't look anything like our foreign policy that was formed in 1945 for a very different world. And if I could sort of summarize it in just a phrase, it's Jim Mattis gave a speech once, and I think he summarized it. It's no better friend, no worse enemy. That the world is not full of neutrals anymore, and there's not going to be a global community, and there's not going to be a utopian situation, or there's not going to be a postmodern globe where we're all climate change advocates and we all believe in gender rights, and it's not going to happen. There's going to be local differences, there's going to be tribalism, there's going to be chaos all over the world, as there is as I speak right now, and what we're going to do is pretty much look at people that we have more than less in common with and support them. They're going to be our friends, and people we feel are disruptors or don't like this American system, we're going to be enemies to. And that's going to make, actually, because we're a unique, exceptional country and we have better judgment than these global organizations like the UN, that's going to make a safer world abroad. And it's going to have a don't tread on me acts. Don't attack the United States. Don't point missiles at Portland, Oregon. Don't cheat on trade, don't fortify or something might happen to you. And we're going to make that decision with the allies that we can and by ourselves if we must. Let me just finish by saying there's two other things I think are very important to understand this end of the post-war world and why this strange fellow from Manhattan real estate entrepreneur was able to craft a message that kind of fit the world as we see it rather than the world as we would like it, and yet it had dramatic electoral ramifications because he appealed to people who were the losers of globalization and resonated with. One is you would think that it wouldn't work because he would be ostracized by all the institutions that fed people into a typical Republican administration. So you see all of these notable diplomats. They have billets at the most prestigious things, and they write op-eds almost every day. He's destroying the world. Anybody who would serve in that administration should be ashamed. And yet, when you look at the 4 or 5 architects who are tasked with carrying this out, they're the finest foreign policy team since World War II. You'll never find a better defense secretary than James Mattis. Mike Pompeo is a brilliant. If you look at his activity compared to a John Kerry or Rex Tillerson or Hillary Clinton, there's no comparison. If you look at Nikki Haley, what she's doing at the UN, if you look at John Bolton as National Security Advisor, these are all excellent points. How can that be? And it's because there were a lot of people in Washington who were not duly appreciated because they saw that the post-war order was not working to a vastly changed world, and when they spoke out against it, they were ostracized. Or that you had to bring people from different walks of life into that administration. And I'll end with just the comment. We talk about the Trump economic boom or the Trump revolution, but I would suggest to you that what we're doing in foreign policy is far more radical and far more important because it's the only system that we can see, that we've seen, that has an answer or at least address things that were considered either not our business or insolvable. So we just look at the world new and we say, think about it, we're liberated. You cannot get out of the Iran deal. Why not? He never sent it to the treaty. He never had it ratified by the Senate. We got out. It's over with. Mitt Romney would have never done that. You cannot say that the Palestinians are not refugees. Why? The Volga Germans were refugees the same year they were. Are they still called refugees? 13 million Prussians walked back, East Germans, to Germany. They were refugees. They're not anymore. Why are the Palestinians special? They're not. No more refugees. No more embassy. Jerusalem has always been the historical and iconic capital of Israel. Just move it. You can't do that. Just do it. So we did it. And on and on and on. And that's a very liberating attitude, and it's starting to have much more ramifications even than the booming economy, which is part and parcel of the foreign policy. So I guess what I'm saying in conclusion is that this foreign policy, besides being principled realism and looking for allies and then accepting that people won't like us and shouldn't like us and we don't like them and we shouldn't like them, it's also saying the world is back to 1946 again, and we're looking at it empirically and we're trying to come up with new solutions, and some of those solutions should have been done a long time ago, and rather than be radical and revolutionary, they're way overdue. Thank you very much.